Welcome to today's podcast. And today we're talking about something that I think is really important, which is your sort of self-confidence, so your self-worth or self-esteem and how it can affect you in your relationships as well as your life.
Yeah, because if you have, if you struggle to value yourself, if you look at yourself and you think that you are lacking, that you're not as good as other people at expressing yourself, that you're more socially anxious, for example, you're not as expressive as other people, you're not stepping into the world full of confidence, then of course this is also going to manifest in the relationships that you seek. And what often happens if one partner has very low self-esteem, they don't value themselves very much, they very often find themselves attracted to people who have something else to offer, who seem to be confident, who seem to not struggle in the world with talking to other people, who have a very high level of self-esteem. So it's almost like by way of compensation that that there's an attraction towards somebody who is different. And that often then creates an imbalance and difficulty in the relationship. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other manifestation is it's very difficult to get into a relationship because you struggle to go on dates. I mean,
Yeah,
I've worked with a lot of people who they don't want to put a profile on a dating website because they lack self-esteem and confidence and think that nobody would like them. So some people do stay alone. It can lead you to be very lonely.
Of course, yeah. I mean, of course, it might stop you in your tracks already because there is very often this deep-seated sense of shame as well, that you're somehow not, that you're not lovable, that other people are not going to like you, that, nobody would want to be in a relationship with you. Why would they? Because, you're not worth anything. So, of course, it can absolutely, at the extreme end, lead to a situation where you're never in a relationship, or not for many, many, many years, because you can't quite believe that you're worth it, so that's one difficulty, and the other one obviously is that that when you do then get into a relationship, you're so grateful that another person could possibly find you desirable, attractive, lovable, that you're willing to kind of almost put up with anything that's coming your way, because this person is willing to spend time with you, be in a relationship with you. And as I say, this gets magnified if that person who then is in a relationship with you is somebody who's super confident, who doesn't question in the same way that you do, who is quite clear about what they want in life. So that then creates a difficulty.
Yeah, and I think that may change a little bit well, first of all, if we describe what self-confidence or self-worth is, I think there's a difference. I mean, I've known people who don't feel confident, who end up in a relationship with somebody else who isn't that confident, and it's not about necessarily bolstering how they feel about themselves, but it matches quite well because maybe they're slightly more introverted and neither of them particularly like going out partying, socializing, but that can work. Yeah, that can work. I mean, I think you know people like that as well. It's sort of, but I think with self-worth, this is where we feel essentially somehow that there's something about us that isn't good enough. And, I think one of the challenges with that is that, like you said, you can get into a relationship where somebody could be quite manipulative and abusive towards them, because it can lead into that pattern where you're looking for somebody to bolster how you feel about yourself. But fundamentally, if you believe that you haven't got self-worth, no matter what the other person says or does, you're never going to feel that you have that self-worth, because this is a deep-rooted belief that you've learned at some point in your life, usually in early childhood, maybe from sort of that interaction with parents, or it could be at school, it could be different times. But there's that fundamental types of belief about something about not being good enough, not being lovable. And so, no matter what your partner does, that's not going to change the way you feel. So you constantly maybe want more. You're maybe more willing to go along with things that your partner does or wants you to do that you don't want to do, but you feel you have to do these things, otherwise they won't love you.
I think I think I would argue that actually there is a potential that there can be healing in a relationship. So if you're lucky enough, or you choose well, and you find a partner who is very secure and can offer you, the kind of love that you crave, there is quite a lot of repair that can actually take place in terms of your sense of self-worth and your self-esteem. I think the difficulty arises when you are choosing a partner who is maybe not quite secure in that sense as well. They might come across as being self-confident, stepping up in the world, or being more demanding, or expressing themselves in that way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're secure either. So I think that's a sort of often a kind of false security in that sense. They might have a need to feed on, because confidence feeds on validation from others, whereas I think self-worth is more inner generated. So confidence is outer focused. So I think the difficulty for me is these kind of combinations where somebody who's very insecure in terms of this, doesn't have much self-worth, then gets into a relationship with somebody who is insecure in a different way. So then that can feed into this cycle of low self-worth even more.
Yeah, and I think I totally take on board what you say, and I think maybe for me the thing is, within a relationship, if you get into a relationship with someone who's secure, there can be a lot of healing. But also, if your beliefs about yourself really not being worthy is so deeply rooted, you could make somebody who's secure become insecure. That can also happen.
Sure.
And I think there are times when, if that self-worth is at such a level that it's so strong, I think it may require almost more than just that relationship to satisfy that. I think it also requires that exploration and insight to realize that these feelings of self-worth come from things in the past, but they don't relate to actually what's happening now. So I think that sometimes we need that extra insight and exploration that therapy and counselling can help you have. It's things that can be very challenging to do on your own, but when you get that insight and realise actually this is from the past. This isn't related to now. I mean, because we're not born with no self-worth.
No.
And I don't believe that at any level. Whatever you say about nature or nurture, I don't believe we're born with no self-worth. We're not lying in our kind of prams or pushchairs thinking I'm not good enough, nobody's going to love me. This is something that we learn as we go through life, from either things we're told or the way that parents or carers interact with us. And then as we go through life, this becomes more and more pronounced. It becomes more and more reinforced. Maybe things we see in relationships.
Yeah, and particularly also if we have parents who have very low self-worth, this sometimes gets sort of passed down the line. There is a sort of an unconscious communication in the family about this, that, we should be meek, we shouldn't have expectations of others, we should just be grateful with our lot in life, these kind of things. So that could also be part of that communication. Or, of course, it could be a more active neglect by the parents, which sometimes they're also not aware of. So self-worth, absolutely low self-worth, always has roots in the past, mostly in childhood. It's undeniable, and therefore needs to be looked at in that way. Yeah,
actually, just to add, I think it's not just about being me, because I actually think there's humbleness.
Sure.
If we look at someone like the Dalai Lama, there's a real beauty in a different type. But it's about not that lack of self-confidence, because the other extreme, the parents who say you need to be the best you can, you need to, so there's this sort of over ego sort of thing that's driven, which means you never feel good enough, because you can't live up to these expectations of yourself being the best at school, the best in whatever, the best in your relationships. So I think either side, it's being too kind of like, people are better than you, or the thing that you should be better than everyone. Both these things can be equally destructive.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so it's not just one or the other. It's just a constant, an ongoing, constant communication around a part of you that is not desirable, or you as a person not being desirable, that somehow gets communicated. That is, that you might not be worth spending time with, you might not be worth being paid attention to, you might not be saying or doing things that are satisfying enough for other people. So it's a whole host of kind of messages over a long period of time along those lines. So that in the end, what gets formed there is the sense of self, which is very fragile, which is almost a little bit hollow, which is very reliant also always on the judgments of other people. And that's why often you then get into relationships where you want to feed off somebody else's perceived safety, stability, strength, so to speak. Feed of them in order to get some of that to strengthen your own ego, your own sense of self. And yes, as I just said, to some extent you can, but it also very often leads you down the garden path, or it leads you into relationships where your partner might either get overwhelmed with this, they can't quite feed that because it's too much for them, or they don't want to, or they abuse it. They abuse your lack of strength, so to speak, in that regard, and they fill it with their own, and you become a sort of hollow shell, which is just an extension of your partner. So you're kind of seeking self-worth by proxy through someone else, and that doesn't work.
No, absolutely. And there's some terms that sometimes I've used in other work that I've done where we're either more internally referenced or externally referenced, or a balance. It's a continuum. And I think if you think about this question now and your response to it, so how do you know when you've done something well? Your answer to that can give you a bit of a clue as to whether you're more internally referenced or externally. Because if you say, well, I know I've done something well because someone tells me, or my partner tells me, or anybody tells me, and you're relying just on that information, then you may never feel good because you're always looking for that external feedback. And again, that's where you may need compliments all the time because you never feel attractive in yourself. So, if you get up in the morning and your partner doesn't say, you look good today, you feel that you look unattractive. So we need that external thing. You can't just feel, I feel good today, or look in the mirror and think, I look good. You need somebody else to tell you. Whereas if your response was, well, I just know it, then you're more internally referenced. And there's a danger with that too, because if you're totally internally referenced, you may become quite sort of what we might say narcissistic. You think you're the best, you think everything about you is great, or it could be the opposite actually. It could be, but you're basically just relying on your own internal thing and not taking feedback from the outside. And again, that might be where you also feel you know you're unattractive and nobody from outside can say anything that has a difference. And that can be problematic. Or where you know that you're kind of God's gift to humanity and all the feedback coming from outside says differently, but you don't take it on board. Yeah. So we need a kind of balance where as we go through life, we first of all, I think we need to have more of that sense in ourselves of how we are, but we also need some feedback from outside and to monitor that, to see, is this right, isn't it? And balancing that out.
Well, absolutely, because we're relational beings, aren't we? We're always relating to others, so we do require that feedback.
Yeah, because there can be, I suppose, also a problem with what you might say is too much self-worth if you're relating it into thinking that everything about you is perfect.
Yeah, that's the sort of grandiose defense of the narcissist, for example. Yeah, that's when, when there is a hollow self as well, and an underlying sense of there isn't a core of yourself at all. So that's just a grandiose defense, but that's not really the kind of self-worth that we're talking about here. No. So really, it's got to be a lot more balanced than that.
Yeah. So there is that sense that we need that balance. We need some feedback from other people, but also to have a sense of ourselves. And often it's where that sense of self and that sense of our own self-worth, as you talked about earlier, hasn't been developed because of his early relationships. And it's never too late to build it. And I think that's the important thing. But it can be challenging because if we've gone through our life having had this sense that we're not worthy of love, we're not kind of good enough in ourselves, then that's something that's been with us a long time. And it's almost like a habit. Any habit is difficult to break the longer that you've had that habit in place. Like, if you're driving and, you realize you've got used to driving with one hand on the wheel, the other hand somewhere else, when you try to put both hands on the wheel, it's really difficult to do. It's very difficult to change a habit. So the way that we've experienced ourselves for so long, the neural connections in our central nervous system that have grown stronger and stronger with each experience, where we feel, I'm in a relationship, I'm not good enough. Each time we have these experiences, those neural connections with all that self-talk, the emotional responses, all these things get reinforced. So they get stronger. Now, to change it, we need to kind of be open to different experiences, different ways of thinking, and also recognize that those feelings, those thoughts are not reality. You've learned them.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you're talking about neurology, you're talking about the body, because these are underlying beliefs that are very, solid, so to speak, solid beliefs that you would need to shake. But I was also mindful of these kind of beliefs and habits, as you say, they often find expression also they are embodied, aren't they? They're sitting in your body. And often with somebody who has very low self-worth, they kind of present like that on a bodily level. I don't know whether you've had that experience. Very often you see people who are sort of slightly slumped or shoulders curved, or they don't carry themselves in the world. They don't walk around with the expectation of kind of owning the space, so to speak. So it might be something that you can also play with, and I think often for people who have very low self-worth, it might be actually really helpful to play around a little bit with their bodily expression, or to do some dancing or acting or something like that, because actually that is really good in that sense, to give you a sense of walking straight, being entitled in the world, wanting to be noticed in the world. Yeah, it's very different, isn't it, if you have self-worth?
Yeah, there is I think everything is interacting in terms of the way that you feel emotionally, the internal dialogue, the beliefs we have, the cognitive domain, and our physiology, so how we hold ourselves. So like you said, if somebody's confident, they stand in a certain way, they move in a certain way. If somebody is lacking confidence, they're stand in a very different way, maybe like you said, shoulder slumps and things. And changing that can have an impact.
Yeah, so see what that feels like if you have your shoulders back, for example.
Yeah, and just think, act as if. So that's one thing I'd say, is like, look at somebody who is confident, who maybe has self-worth, and act as if. How do they stand? How do they move? How might they talk? And that can help. I think it's a starting point, but it's not enough for me. I think, because I know many actors who, on stage, they seem really confident, but off stage, they're very unconfident. So it's, I think just working on the body can help, but we need to do more than that, because you have it's all the thoughts that go with it too.
Yeah,
and this is where the beliefs are.
It's not, of course, it's not going to sort out the problem, but it's one way of.
Yeah, and I think just dealing with one isn't enough, maybe anyway. So I think if we can look at helping change some of those beliefs and change the physiology, then we can do more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a combined approach, isn't it? It's a holistic approach. It's working with you, with someone as a whole person, as a person who's got a thinking mind, as a person who's got a soul, because you want to address that too, as a person who's got a body. So you want to address all of that, ideally, in therapy, for example.
Yeah. So I think, first thing, just a little thing that you can do, though, is to help with self-confidence, is like you said, go out, go for a walk, and walk in the way you'd walk if you were confident, like an actor acting that role. Like when a boxer goes into a boxing match, they have a piece of music that plays. I think there was it after the film Rocky, I think they play Eye of the Tiger. So think of a piece of music that even brings that kind of confidence, and either put headphones on or play it in your head and walk down the street hearing that music, and just imagine the pavement's almost rumbling under your feet because you're so confident. So these things can be quite good. I don't know, I think you need to do more than that for it to last, but they can really help give you a sense that actually, you can feel confident. There's times you don't, but it doesn't mean that you can't right now. And I think the next step with that is actually dealing with some of these sort of beliefs about self-worth, which, I think ideally you're probably working with a therapist or counsellor is really going to help with that, because it may take time, you may need to have that kind of deeper insight. But we want to get to the level where I see things as being able to detach from those thoughts. So it's not that those thoughts about I'm not good enough won't be there, but you can have those thoughts and realise that they're not real. They're just like background noise that we've learned from the past, but we're able to detach the emotional significance that those thoughts have. And that can take years sometimes, but I think, sometimes working through exploring where they come from, we can get to that level where, we may have those thoughts, but we don't believe them. You don't have to believe that internal dialogue that says, nobody's going to love you.
Yeah, it's creating a different truth, isn't it? It's creating a different narrative. It's creating a different truth about yourself, a different way of thinking and experiencing yourself, which takes some time, of course. And I think I sort of want to come back to where we started this discussion in this podcast today, which was about your choice in partner, that you often choose partners who seem to be confident, etc. So I think one of the takeaway messages for you today is, well, first of all, it's about, it's work that you can do on yourself, and you can develop more self-worth and a higher self-esteem, having a different estimate of yourself. That's absolutely possible. But I also think it's so important when you have quite low self-worth to be doubly aware of who you're going out with, who you're dating, and to kind of have maybe slightly different criteria there as well, to be more mindful of choosing somebody who can offer you more of a healing experience, maybe supporting your path towards more self-worth rather than undermining it further. So by choosing a partner quite carefully in terms of, is this someone who can help me feel more secure in the world? Is this someone who can support me more, who is loving, who likes themselves enough to also be able to pay attention to me, who can kind of offer me a different healing experience rather than undermining me further?
And that can be challenging, and maybe in another podcast we can talk more about how you can do that, because if you don't know what will give you a healing experience, you won't know what to look for. If you don't have enough self-worth, you may think that you're needing that person to constantly compliment you. So that could be challenging. So I think maybe we could talk about that more another time. And I think picking up on something you said as well, another takeaway, when you said creating a different truth, for me, it's more about realizing that there is no truth. There is only narrative. Sure. So everything that we learn something is good or bad because of our experience. In themselves, like a piece of music that you can't stand, it's not that it's good or bad, it's that you've learned that I don't like it, that I think this is awful. So it's our, some people love it. So it's not, so it's the same with, if you're thinking I'm not lovable, that's not a truth. That's something that you've learned. It's a narrative. And we can change that. And as soon as you realize that these are not kind of truths, they're not kind of reality, it's just our thoughts, we can begin to step back.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. So Great. That's the starting point always, isn't it?
Yeah. So, anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Please head over to therelationshipmaze.com and take our free argument style quiz where you can discover your argument style for free. And tune in next week and press